Good morning. Peace to you. It is good to be with you this morning in this way, even though it would be so much more lovely to be with you in person and see your smiling faces looking back at me. It's been one of the joys of my position to visit congregations of MCEC. So it's good to be with you this morning. I will be sharing my screen with you as we go through the sermon this morning so that you have images to look at, not just my face. Nancy Griffith has a song that I love. It begins like this. From a distance, the world looks blue and green, the snow-capped mountains white. The song goes on to describe the harmony and friendship that can be seen from a distance, even though the up-close experience may be otherwise. And the up-close experience of 2020 so far has felt on many levels like anything but harmonious. What a year 2020 has been. On a CNN website, a journalist began an article on July 3rd with this sentence: "We regret to inform you that 2020 is only halfway over, even though it feels like it's been going on for half a century." Isn't that the truth? The year started out with wildfires in Australia, the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani in Iran by a US drone, the crash of the Ukrainian jet, a volcanic eruption in the Philippines, a helicopter crash that killed Kobe Bryant and his daughter, the beginning of the impeachment trial for Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, and Brexit. And that was just in January. Then in March, of course, we had the declaration of the coronavirus that was wreaking havoc in China, that was now a global pandemic. There's little doubt that 2020 will be remembered as a year when chaos entered our world and our lives in a way that we had not experienced before, at least for those of us that have lived the majority of our lives in North America. The song by Nancy Griffith reminds us of the beauty that can exist in our lives and in our world when we step back to get some perspective and distance. I'm not suggesting that we step back in order to avoid conflict or minimize differences and suffering, but it's the kind of stepping back that helps us gain perspective. It's seeing things in a new way with new eyes. The creation account we have in the first chapter of Genesis gives us a picture of the world ordered and at peace. From the formless void and darkness, the Hebrew is tohu vabohu, a term denoting chaos, God brought order. Over the watery chaos, a wind of God swept, breathing order, separating light from darkness, creating day and night. God's first act of creation was ordering the chaos. In this creation story, God is the only actor. The story opens our scriptures and sets the precedent for God, God's power, and God's love to be the center of all the stories that follow in scripture. And it sets the precedent for how we are invited to view our own lives and stories with God at the center, or as the center of those stories and lives. Now, it isn't easy to let God be the center of our lives, to live our lives in ways that recognize that we aren't in control of as much as we think we are. Early in 2017, probably one of the more formative and moments of my life, when I was still living in Goshen in early 2017, I ran into obstacles related to a work visa, getting a new work visa that would allow me to continue to work in the US. Our family had moved to Goshen 6 years before that, in 2011, so that my husband Alan could become a professor of preaching at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary. I got my visa to work as a pastor in a congregation in Goshen. But then in 2017, when my visa was about to expire, we found that the path to getting a new visa wasn't as easy as we had hoped, or wasn't going to be as quick as we hoped. Alan and I made the difficult decision that I would move back to Ontario, to Kitchener-Waterloo, and take an interim ministry assignment in 2017 until we had a better sense of my visa situation. But then the church leadership minister position became open, and since we were no closer to getting a visa for me, I decided to apply, and we now find ourselves living in 2 different countries. In the midst of my own visa challenges, undocumented immigrants were living in fear for their lives. While my own situation was difficult on a personal level, this broader situation in the country helped me view my own situation from a distance, where I realized that I didn't live in fear of deportation. My home country was a place of welcome and safety for me. Yes, it's difficult to live apart from Alan, particularly now in a pandemic when we don't know, when it makes it harder to cross borders. But we are each privileged with employment that is fulfilling and meaningful. We have not lost our lives, our family, or our livelihood. I believe that the pandemic has reminded all of us that we are not in control. I think we've always known that, but this has really made it apparent that we aren't in control. It is hard to plan for the future because we don't know right now when the second wave will come. I think we can say it will come. That's what science tells us, but we don't know when that will be. We need to hold all of our plans loosely. My visa experience and now this time of pandemic invite me to trust in a new way. Then that God, the same God who acted at creation to bring order out of chaos, would also act to make a way through the chaos of my situation. Part of that journey was letting go of my need to know what was coming next. The process of letting go was like taking a step back, getting the distance I needed in order to see my life and situation differently. When we look up in the midst of chaos, beyond ourselves, beyond our immediate situation, or when we momentarily let go, we are given new eyes to see. In the midst of the early part of this chaos, the chaos of my visa situation, I read a book that got me interested in chaos theory and quantum physics. Now, don't be afraid. Do not fear. I am not a scientist. There is very little that I understand about quantum physics and chaos theory. I am not a scientist, but the book I read was about leadership and compared what we know and understand about leadership in organizations to the new things that are being discovered in science, like quantum physics and chaos theory. And so a lot of this applies to the church. So it'll be simple. I probably will not do justice to these theories. So my apologies to the scientists in our midst. And I have pictures that will help to illustrate what I'm talking about. So let's begin with quantum physics. The science that most of us learned in school and under which we generally operate taught us that we can understand the whole if we break it down into parts. So the science most of us learned is that the world is predictable and controllable, that we just have to understand it so that we can objectively measure it. The world and everything in it, including people, is seen as a machine where every part has a function and every person has a role, and we just need to understand how it works. Charts, organizational flow charts, they assure us that if everyone does what they're supposed to do, then the organization will run smoothly and efficiently. Reason, logic, predictability have been highly valued under classical principles of seeing the world. Now, I'm sure you're all laughing. We know that the world isn't predictable or logical, and if we didn't know it before March of 2020, we sure know it now. No matter how much we learn and discover about the physical world, there is so much that remains a mystery. Scientists have discovered in quantum physics a confusing, weird, and fascinating world that explains in a mysterious and confusing way this unpredictability that we all know and experience. Rather than seeing the world in predictable ways, like classical science, which says that if you just study it enough, we will understand it and control it, quantum physics provides new perspectives. It says that nothing is fixed or measurable. The world is dynamic, interactive, and interconnected, and you can only understand it if you look at how everything is related, if you look at the relationships rather than the predictability. Scientists have found that even at the microscopic level, the level of particles and electrons, when there is no obvious connection between two things, they respond and react to each other, indicating some sort of relationship. We can apply this to a congregation in order to understand this better. Most of us, if we're asked to describe our congregation, will likely talk about the congregation in terms of the people and the relationships, rather than the organizational structure or the way decisions are made or how many committees there are. We see our churches, our congregation, as interactive, dynamic, and interconnected. Predictability is probably not the first word we'd use to describe our congregation. Although we can generally trust that worship will happen on Sunday mornings, except in March when we really weren't sure how to do worship when we suddenly couldn't meet in our buildings. And so there were moments or maybe days or weeks where we weren't sure that even worship was predictable. We totally understand that we are all affected by what happens to a member in our congregation, even if we have no obvious personal connection with that person. Our individual congregations, as well as the community of congregations we know as MCEC, are also good examples of quantum physics. The coronavirus has also shown us that we are all connected around the world and impacted by the same thing. In our congregations and in quantum physics, there's no way to accurately predict outcomes because we don't know all the possible connections that exist. Sometimes change occurs with no apparent cause. In physics, this is called a quantum leap, a leap that appears abrupt and without any apparent connection to anything at all or anything that came before it. There have been a few world events that seem to illustrate quantum leap. I think the election in the US in November of 2016 would be an example. That was one in which the results were such that no one could have predicted. The fall of the Berlin Wall, which seemingly happened out of the blue. We've seen movements in our world that come out of nowhere and impact the course of history. One can hope that we are in a time of where racial justice and equality will also be a quantum leap into a world and a society where there's justice and peace for all. That's a very brief glimpse into quantum physics. Let's move on to chaos theory. Most of us have an automatic aversion to chaos, and rightly so. Chaos tends to bring disorientation and sometimes even destruction, as we see in in natural disasters, events. I certainly wouldn't have chosen to enter into the chaos of my life from 2017 if I could have avoided it. When tragedies strike, when the world as we know it is changed, it's disorienting and painful. We feel a sense of hopelessness and uncertainty. The creation account in Genesis 1 describes the earth as an empty wasteland, giving us a picture of disorientation, of the disorientation of chaos. But it also gives us a picture of God's presence in the chaos. God's Spirit, a mighty wind, moved over the waters, and in so doing, God created a livable world where there was previously none, order where there had been chaos. Chaos in this account and throughout the biblical text is a cosmic force that is loose in the world. Chaos in biblical accounts is anything or anyone that is opposed to the rule of Yahweh, often given a name: Pharaoh, Babylon, Assyria, King Herod. Exodus, the Psalms, prophets like Jeremiah, these historical figures like Jeremiah name these historical figures and give them the attributes of chaos. One image of chaos in the Bible then is this force that existed from the beginning and is opposed to God and God's reign. At the same time, the Bible also shows chaos as a force that can be subdued by God. God is the one who rules over the chaos and can use it as a tool to do God's work. We see that in the flood and the crossing of the Red Sea. In these accounts, the waters of chaos function at God's command and for God's purposes. The Bible takes seriously the presence and reality of chaos in our world and in our lives. And it also gives us a picture of what chaos looks like under the governance and control of God. The Bible shows us what life is like when God is in control. But the balance of chaos and order, it's a precarious one. The imagery in the prophets also shows a creation that can be undone at the command of God. Margaret Wheatley, the author of the book I read, talks about the relationship between chaos and order and says that they are mirror images of each other, and that even within chaos, there are boundaries that are well ordered and predictable. When scientists track systems that appear to be chaotic, over time, they see these systems settle into patterns and order. Chaos, Wheatley says, has always partnered with order. And being able to plot these seemingly unordered, chaotic systems on computers has revealed an order that is strangely beautiful. Scientists call these chaotic patterns fractal images and strange attractors, and say that they are not the shape of chaos, but the shape of wholeness. When we concentrate on individual moments or fragments of experience, we see only chaos. But if we stand back and look at what is taking shape, we see order. From a distance, the world looks blue and green. Wheatley makes the point numerous times that it is the presence and reality of chaos that brings about new life and creativity. Without chaos, destruction, undoing, there can be no new life. We see this repeatedly in the biblical text, a story that moves from chaos to order to chaos to order. The creation account in Genesis 1 sets out a world of order with everything in its place. And then following that account are stories of chaos, messy relationships, people losing their way. Repeatedly, the poets and prophets of the biblical text remind us that God is in control. The word of God present at the beginning in the chaos is in control. The order that is present in this account continues to order our world. While we are experiencing much that feels chaotic, not just pandemic, but climate change, so that the seasons seem less predictable, or the pandemic, which has disordered daily life, the predictability of night following day following night remains an order that we can count on. These ideas about chaos, order, relationships, and interconnectedness are abundantly apparent to us right now in this time of pandemic. There are so many moments in this that feel chaotic, and yet there's also beauty that emerges in this chaos even now. There's no doubt that we are all connected by a virus that is only visible microscopically, but has wreaked havoc on the whole world. We are also impacted by the violence in other parts of the world and in our own country. The Black Lives Matter movement, discrimination, and the violence against people who are Black, Indigenous, people of color. This impacts us, even if we have no close apparent connection to any of these people or situations. Stories of destruction and devastation touch us deeply and personally, and they call us to respond with compassion and care, or with action. Chaos brings clarity in terms of who we are, and I think particularly in terms of who we are as people of faith. It awakens us in a renewed way to our call and our identity as people of God, partners in working for justice, speaking for the voiceless, protecting the vulnerable, and welcoming the stranger. This is our call as followers of Jesus Christ. This is exactly the call we find in Ephesians 3. Through Christ, we are entrusted with the mystery of God's grace, a grace that reconciles those who have been divided, a grace that welcomes those who were at one time excluded from the promises of God. Paul calls himself a prisoner for Jesus Christ for the sake of the Gentiles. He says, in former generations, the mystery of Christ was made known to all people, but now it has been revealed through prophets. Paul says in former generations, the mystery of Christ was not made known to all people, but now it has been revealed through prophets and apostles. Gentiles have become fellow heirs of the promise, members of the same body, and sharers in the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. Paul is called to bring the Gentiles the news of the boundless riches of Christ, and to make everyone see what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God who created all things. And this is how Paul articulates that plan of the mystery. So that through the church, the wisdom of God in its rich variety might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. This is the call of the church, to be a vehicle through which God will work. The mystery hidden for ages in God who created all things is that the wisdom of God will be made known to the world through the church. That is our call and our identity. Through the church, the manifold, multifaceted, diverse wisdom of God is made known, revealed, and embodied. This church is now as diverse as God's wisdom. In fact, if the church is not diverse, it will not make known the diverse and multifaceted wisdom of God. The church will be successful in its witness when it is diverse ethnically, racially, culturally, and socioeconomically. The church becomes a witness through whom the wisdom of God is made known when it is made up of those who should not be able to get along or coexist. This church, made up of those who were near and those who were far off, now embodies and represents the diversity of God's wisdom. This mystery of Christ was present in the beginning when chaos was ordered and the world as we know it began. The mystery of God is still present in our world and embodied by us, the church, the visible sign of God with us. Living into the manifold, diverse wisdom of God is messy. Many times it is an experience of chaos, uncertainty, and disorientation. There is no doubt that this is a time of uncertainty and upheaval in the church. The pandemic has changed the church and forced it out of the building. Who are we when we don't worship in our building, or when we don't sing together or eat together? Who are we becoming in this time? And what will we look like when we emerge from this? Who will we be in the future? As MCEC, we want to ask these questions together with our pastors and our congregations and engage with each other in this formational time, in this, dare I say it, Kairos moment, this moment for such a time as this. We know we won't all answer these questions the same way, or maybe we won't even necessarily agree with each other on where these questions are inviting us to go or the implications of how we answer them. But we are a community of congregations as Mennonite Church Eastern Canada, connected in seen and unseen ways, and what happens with one congregation affects us all. It is unsettling and disorienting to live in such a time as now. Close up, it is hard to see beauty and order at times, but from a distance, our hope is that we look as beautiful as these fractal images. Our hope is that the world will see not the chaos or division, but the beauty of God's manifold and diverse wisdom, embodied in a people who are figuring out what it means to love each other in the midst of diversity. Our hope is that in our embodiment of God's wisdom, we will be a picture of wholeness, not chaos. If we are to be a vehicle through which God's wisdom is made known, then we can hope that this messy, chaotic thing we call the church looks like the beauty of fractal images and strange attractors. The biblical story and the world of new science remind us that chaos and order are part of the same dance, and that even small changes in one place have an impact in another place. This dance of chaos and order calls us to put our trust and our hope in the one who governs even the chaos. May we not lose hope, but trust that this time is governed by the one who breathed order into chaos. The God who calls us also holds us and holds our world. Let it be so.